Hey guys, today I wanted to go over laying out your inputs and outputs in Holley, and before you start wiring your new project or rewiring your old project, I figured something like this would help. I just did a video on this about smart wire, and I figured I would do the same thing on how to do it with Holley. So let's get into it. The first thing you're going to want to do, if you don't already have this IO ICF, you go into Toolboxes, Preferences, Toolboxes, Add Individual Config, and then you go IO, and then there's a couple options, but just go to Base Config Blank. We already have it, so what you'll do is you'll create all of your inputs. You name them, what type they are. So dome pressure is a 5-volt sensor, speed, frequency, thermistor, yada yada. So buttons or switches go into the ECU, 12 volt. You want to make sure that you create all of these, right? Create everything that you want in the car. This is always like step one for me when I'm wiring a car. So you always create all of these inputs so that you know where they have to actually go in the ECU. If you create, one or two of them or whatever and say, okay, this is where it's going to go, you put them in the ECU and then you say, oh man, I'm halfway through this wiring project and I need to add this, this, and this, you might be screwed. You might come up with an uglier project or even an uglier result to your project. So I always lay out every input and every output that the car is going to have. Some of these are left blank. I removed them because I don't want to get questions about what was some of this stuff that was in here. I just don't want to get into it. So the purpose of this is to show you how to lay out your pin map, how to read the pin map, and how to translate that into actually wiring the car and having a good end result. So once we have created all of our inputs and outputs, you don't have to get into the configuration of all of them at this time. You can do all that when you're done, but just create your name, the type, and enable it. And all of them are going to say not defined when you create them. So then you click over here on pin map. So I've already laid all this out. This is for my own personal car. So what you'll do, understand that the way I wire a car, and you could do whatever you want, but certain stuff goes to certain locations on the car, right? So if you're like here, this is the J3 connector. This is all going to the rear of the car, and with my car, it's going through some bulkheads. So there's a bulkhead that goes to the rear of the car, and then there's a bulkhead that goes into the transmission tunnel. So off of J3, I grab the stuff that's going to go to the back of the car or to the transmission. So trans temp, converter PSI, track temp, tire temp, trans line PSI, fuel level, all that kind of stuff is in the back of the car or in the transmission tunnel. So instead of having a cluster of wires that go from J3 and then over to J4, you kind of keep it all abridged. You keep it all consolidated into one. You'd click here, view outputs. As you can see, this is stuff that is transmission related. The chute release, this is mounted behind the back seat, so it makes sense to have it all come out one location of J3 and go to all of those devices. So lay out your pin map before you even strip or crimp a single wire. Just lay out your pin map. Something that a lot of you guys seem to miss is this view fixed. So if you view fixed, what this is these are pins in the ECU that you cannot change. They are what they are. You cannot modify them. So we were just looking at J3. So now we know we have on J3 we have two 5-volt outputs, right? And then we have two sensor grounds, and we also got CAN channel 2 low and high that is fixed into J3. So before you, and this kind of plays into why you want to lay things out in accordance to where they go in the car. So this is transmission and whatnot and the rear end of the car. Now we know that all of these things are going to be now sharing the same sensor ground pin or two sensor ground pins for J3 and sensor 5-volt pins from J3. So we can start laying out and writing out how long each wire is going to be and what does it need? Does it need 5-volt? Is it a thermistor input where it only needs a sensor ground? Is it fuel level where it only needs sensor ground, or is it a 12-volt output, right? So, or a 12-volt input. So do we need to send 12-volt out to it? So you're probably looking at this and going, well, that's up on J2B. What you can do is create an output like this, Boost Control Plus, and I made this output. Granted, this is just an example. I would have put it up here if I needed it. But this is a 12 volt output. It turns on when battery is above 8 volts, and it powers the boost control solenoids. So if I needed a 12 volt to supply for a device in the car, you can create an output. And once you've done that, you now know, hey, I'm out of pins on J3. Well, maybe I want to move the majority of this stuff over to J4 where it can all go on one connection, right? So try to work within the confines of each individual connector, and it'll also make your job look a lot nicer when it's done, and it'll also make it a little bit easier to tackle. So if you go out to the garage and you decide, okay, today I'm going to tackle J4. Now you know J4 is all of these items. You can write them out on a piece of paper. I'm old, so I write everything out. But you write it out on a piece of paper. You can give it a color, like what color wire it's going to be, and you can give it a length, and you can build the majority of J4 right on your workbench. You'll end up having a lot nicer of a end result. So you can put this in the car when you're all said and done, and you know, maybe everything's a little bit too long. You've got all your stuff already mounted. You put it in the car. You bend it around how it's got to go to get to whatever devices it is. Take a magic marker, write on the wire, like, hey, or, you know, draw a line on the wire, like this is where it's got to break out to go this way or that way. And you can mock it all up, and then you can terminate the whole thing on the bench so that when you put it in the car, it's a plug and play type deal. So you get J4 out of the way, and now you're left with just J3, J2B, J2A, and yada, yada. The more time you spend with laying this out, in my opinion, the nicer your end result will be. So don't just hammer through your pin map and slam stuff wherever you want it to go, or wherever you think it should go. Be mindful that, hey, you know, maybe we're going to add dump valves later this year. Run wire for them, you know? So run wire for them. Check the manufacturer's specifications on the dump valve, see what kind of amperage that they draw. And if you think that they're going to be something that needs a relay, or if they're a very low amp device and they don't need a relay, wire up the relay for them so that, you know, when the budget allows and you got to spend a couple extra $100, you can buy the dump valves and plug them in. And when you plug them in, you're done. You just enable them in the software. Now you have dump valves, as opposed to, well, now I got to go hack into the nice harness that I built and cut all this stuff up so that I can fit 2 dump valves in here. Plan ahead. So maybe you don't have all of these, you know, I'm not trying to sell you anything, but maybe you don't have all of this crap in the car, right? So you don't have all this stuff. Maybe you don't have all these outputs, right? But that doesn't mean that in the future you may want to. One of the biggest things that I see for new guys that are getting into this hobby, into this sport, is that they just manually shift the car. Why as the cars get faster and faster, you're going to want the ECU to shift the car. Wire it up. Have it ran by the shifter. You know, tape it up at the end or terminate it to a connector so that when you buy something for an air shifter, you can plug it right in. If you plan ahead, you'll typically have a lot better of an end result. So this was really just supposed to be a quick video of how to lay out your stuff. Hopefully it helped y'all understand that this pin map function in here will teach you a lot. It'll help you a lot if you plan it out ahead of time. So, and don't forget to look at view fixed, because that's where your sensor ground and your sensor 5 volt is. If you need a more extensive look at this, you can go into the help file up here, but all of your inputs are here. And if you don't know already, your input types, you've got 5 volt, 20 volt thermistor, high side, so it'd be a 12 volt input or ground input. And then as far as outputs, you've got a 12 volt output or a ground output, and then you've got a pulse width modulated positive, which means it pulses a 12 volt signal, or a pulse width modulated negative, which means it pulses a ground. So those are your input and output types. Plan ahead, write it out. I know what most people do is they grab their harnesses out of the box and they start slamming them in the car and they go, man, I can't wait to get this all done and we're going to get this thing fired up. if you allot yourself a little bit extra time, you have a lot nicer of an end result. And if wiring scares the hell out of you, like it does to a lot of people, hit me up, and maybe I can get you on my schedule and I'll wire up your car for you. So hopefully this helped. See you.